Welcome to the NextGen podcast, where we explore the next generation's perspectives on the future of business. This podcast is powered by Commercient Sync. To learn more about integrating your ERP and CRM today, you can visit commercient.com. Today, I'm joined by Victoria Jenkins, as always, my co-host, and John Fish. So, Victoria, I'll kick it over a little bit to you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Victoria Jenkins. I'm the content specialist here at Commercient, and I'm also one of the youngest members of Commercient. I'm part of Gen Z. Noah, you're a millennial, and John, you're Gen Z as well, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure what the cutoff is. I'm 99, so I'm thinking Gen Z.
We're quite close in age. Okay. So yeah, thanks for being here today, John. So you are a Harvard computer science student, which is awesome. Good luck with that. And you're a YouTuber with 836,000 subscribers, which is quite a few. I am one of them. I love your videos. Really excited to talk to you today. And you mentioned you're an entrepreneur and artist. So tell us a bit about some of your favorite videos. What's some of the best stuff that you think you've done recently?
Sure, absolutely. That's a very nice intro. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I think recently, I just actually got back from a year away from school. So after sophomore year of college, I took a year off for a number of reasons. But one of them was that I was having this great success with YouTube, and up for, a large portion of my life. I started in tech very early. I started coding when I was like 10 years old, something like that. I worked at Shopify for a few years in software. I always thought I was going into software. And then YouTube really started to take off, and I started to kind of understand that there were multiple possible career paths for me. And what I was really interested in was, is there a career at the intersection of these things? So is there a future for me where I can be working on technology stuff, but also be making videos, because I love making videos. So kind of taking these like technology and artistic elements, putting them together, and seeing, what comes out. So that was part of what I was trying to explore over the year. And I ended up doing some really cool work with some AI companies that are looking at those things. So looking at this kind of intersection of art and technology, seeing how it all comes together. And so in terms of like videos, concrete videos that I made over the past year that were really fun, I made one that was really interesting. I thought, I was looking at linguistics. So I was looking at kind of like the human language and how our brain processes language. And there's this notion of universal grammar that was introduced by Noam Chomsky. And it's this kind of idea that you are, that there's certain structures within your brain which lend themselves towards kind of organizing grammar in some way. So there's like these hierarchical recursive structures. You kind of make a tree of sentences.
Yeah.
And so I wrote a program to kind of implement that and to make just infinitely many sentences. And this was like a huge achievement in psychology when Chomsky introduced it, because it completely changed the train of thought. It used to be like behaviorism. Humans are animals that kind of just like react to things that we see and then we replicate them. And Chomsky said, no, humans are actually creative. So it's actually like a landmark kind of theory. And so I wrote a program to kind of implement it, and then I made the longest book in the world with it. And I printed all the books out, and so I had like a giant stack of books that I've since given away for the most part to people. But yeah, that's kind of like an idea of the type of videos and some context on why I make videos.
Yeah, that's very cool. That kind of brings me to, actually, I was watching your video last night about how you coded that program that would write different sonnets by Shakespeare. That's one of my favorites. I've seen it a few times. I thought it was really interesting, as I really am into literature and Shakespeare and all these old works. And so that brings me to recurrent neural networks, and you did a really good explanation of that in that video. As someone who has no background in computer science, I was able to understand that quite well. So I was wondering if you have any ideas of how that can be applied to different applications in new ways.
I think RNNs are really interesting for exactly the kind of purposes that I've been describing of finding this intersection between art and technology, right? And there's this really fascinating question that I'm still diving into, and I'm trying to do it now more from like an art side. I've looked at it from the tech side for a while, but I'm actually looking at it from the art side now, where it's like, okay, where does creativity start and where does it end? Like human creativity. And I think it's such a fascinating question. It's such a hard question to answer. When you have computers, so if you don't have context on like what RNNs can do, basically you can feed them like a bunch of paintings just as training data, or just a singular painting, and then it can create things in the style of that painting, as an example of what RNNs can do. So if you feed it like Starry Night, then it can take a photo and it can make that photo look as if it was painted in the style of Starry Night, which is really interesting. But it begs to question, right? Like, where is the creativity then in pieces of art, right? Is it purely these kind of stylistic elements which can now be replicated by computers? Or is it something deeper? Is it something inherent in like the abstraction of reality that computers can't do? And what happens when computers can do that, right? It's a really interesting question, I think, to say, can computers make art? Or is what they're doing, as you know, my middle school art teacher would say, is what they're doing just craft, right? Is what they're doing kind of just replicating a known pattern? Can they actually be truly original in their creative endeavors? And I'm not sure that what is being done right now is necessarily answering these questions, right? A lot of people are using RNNs to say, look at this, interesting phenomena that I've created, right? Doesn't it look so cool? Isn't it so like aesthetically interesting? And that's what I've done for a lot of this as well. But what I'm really curious about is, how can artists use RNNs as tools? So how can this technology be used in such a way that what I think is cool is there like a point where you can't tell if a computer or a human made it, but it's still compelling to you? Like, I think that's kind of like the ideal that I'm shooting for.
Okay, that's really cool.
So I think it's but it's a really hard question to answer from any perspective.
So it almost seems like you're trying to say that these RNNs and these systems should be used as an artist tool, but not as it should not be an artist itself.
Yeah, because I think because they have to be written anyways. So even if there is no kind of human, what we would think of as a typical kind of artistic endeavor, right? Putting a paintbrush to canvas, or whatever the analog may be in your medium. There is no kind of self-writing network, right? So the programmer has to write with some aesthetic intent in mind, and they will change the program if they're not getting what they want. So in a sense, they are being the artist, even in just writing the code. You could make an argument for that. But what I think is really interesting is, now that we have these programs which are very flexible, you can kind of just change parameters and see what pops out. Suddenly these programs become very powerful tools for artists, because you don't need that technical background as much. And so the way in which you use it is a little bit different.
Okay, very cool.
So I guess the question then for me becomes, if you fed a neural network with input of art that you had drawn, right? Like either photos or even like graphic design art, like a .ai image, or like a photoshopped image that you had created. Is the goal of the neural network then to produce art that would not be able to be replicated by the human? It would be something that's totally unimagined? Or is the goal to merge styles? Like, if I know that I can create like beautiful naturescapes, but I know I have problems drawing people, which one would the neural network really approach that you're thinking of kind of take?
I mean, it really depends on how you design the network. They're very flexible, right? So what's very famous and what I have used in videos, they're oh shoot, what is it called? It's called Neural Style, if you want to Google it. What's done in that approach is, there's a neural network which is trained on the kind of style elements. So you create these like mathematical representations of style, and it's trained on style elements of of a painting. So you could train it on your work if you're saying, you have drawings or whatever. And it would then, it trains another network on content. So it looks at a huge library of images, and it learns to represent content mathematically. So like shapes and objects and the way in which they come together. And then what you're doing when you're applying this network to another image is you're saying, okay, let's start with static, right? Just like a random image. And over time, let's make it more like the style of the painting and more like the content of the photo. And let's do that a bunch of times, as many times as you know, and you think necessary until you get a good result. And then what pops out is kind of a combination of the two. And so in theory, yes, you could use it for your application if you're bad at drawing people, but you like your style of drawing lines or the way in which you use paint, etc. You could do that, but you'd really have to experiment with the network and the design of the network and the parameters you're putting into it, because these things are pretty finicky. And it's a very frustrating process sometimes to train these networks because it takes a really long time to train even on very powerful computers. And so to get kind of like a whimsical result out of it, right, to just apply like a famous painting is pretty straightforward. But then to actually use it for your own original creative tasks, sometimes you need to have a much deeper understanding of what's actually going on. And so, but they're getting to a point now, where they're kind of consumer facing tools where you can put in your artwork and your photo and it'll kind of pop something out relatively quickly.
Will there become a time, do you think, when these AIs are producing artwork where we can't tell if it's made by a human or a computer and it becomes insanely questionable and there's some negative implications possibly?
I don't know if there are negative implications. Like I think it's just kind of another evolution in art, because one of the things, right, is that these computers are still limited in the mediums in which they can produce content, right? So everything that we've been talking about thus far has been producing digital. But if you go into a museum or a gallery, typically everything is done with a more physical medium. You're not seeing that, although there is definitely digital work, and I'm not, but you'll see a lot more paintings and sculpture and so on. So when you get to thinking about the process of actually having these works be translated into these more physical mediums, suddenly that becomes a bit of an artistic process itself, because you're actually designing and engineering a machine to create art. And the design of that machine is so proprietary that it's actually like, that's kind of the art in itself, if that makes sense. So I think that's the interesting part, right? Where it's like, and I can imagine definitely, gallery exhibits where you have a robot, doing paintings. That would be a crazy gallery exhibit, in my opinion. I think it'd be really cool. Yeah. And it's not technically infeasible to think about, but it's definitely technically complicated, and it's not a plug and play solution. Like you really need to know what you're doing if you're gonna be making a robot, a robotic arm do a painting in a way that actually looks real, not just kind of like splotches here and there. And so there is technology for that. I think actually pretty advanced technology with counterfeiting paintings. Although I think a lot of that's done by hand. I don't know. Interesting world.
I think it's become more of a mix now.
Yeah. But yeah, there's definitely like an intersection that'll happen at some point. There will be a point where computers are making this physical art and you can't tell. And what I just think is really interesting, I don't think that you're going to see human artists being replaced. I think you're going to see human artists being able to do way cooler stuff, because you might have a vision and it might take you, 40 hours to paint that vision or 100 hours to paint it. But if your computer can do that overnight in 12 hours, suddenly it's like, okay, now what can you paint? Like what visions can you actually execute on that you previously wouldn't have because of the constraints that your body kind of places on you.
Yeah. Wow. And I think that leads to an interesting argument that most people are afraid of when it comes to neural networks and AI, which is, robots are going to take over my future, or I'm going to suddenly be replaced by a supercomputer. And I think that perspective is actually totally wrong in a lot of senses. One of them being that not only are neural networks able to do things faster and more efficiently than we are in some manners with the right inputs and tweaking. But humans evolve over time to use different tools that we've succumbed to over the years, whether it's computers or technology or just in general over time. I was listening to another podcast that was very interesting, and they were going into how people actually with AI are able to change their job roles completely. So instead of someone being a graphic designer in this case, we might have a neural network set up to where they could put a minimal input in and produce hundreds of websites or whatever it is that they're trying to produce graphics for. So I think that's an interesting take on it. Going on the hypothetical prosthetic arm robot that's painting, I had a question from one of your videos that I had watched where you had programmed the Alexa timer for your study method, which I thought was really interesting, having programmed a few things for our office Alexa. And knowing the frustrations of, oh, okay, well, this is kind of limited. I can't do this and this. Like you having to go back and basically make a video screen that plays the timer rather than have it just actually be a clock. So I understand the frustrations of that. The question I had for you, seeing you use like a new technology with AI in it, be it a more basic AI than a neural network with Alexa, where do you think wearable AI fits into place? We've seen Google Glass come out and fail a few times over the years. We've seen wearable technology like Apple Watches take off, but I think there's room for AI in wearables. What are your thoughts on that?
With wearables specifically, I think the biggest application is health. I think that you're seeing really big success in companies like Fitbit, and that's a major appeal of the Apple Watch as well. Simply having biometrics tracking information, which kind of presents a whole other, slew of problems with privacy and whatnot. But I think when done well, can be really useful. I wore a Fitbit for many years actually. And so I think health is the number one place. And what you'll see, I hope, in the future is as we build these data sets of heart information, especially, that in the Apple Watch, I think is already doing this, but that you can start to detect abnormalities and aberrations. And that could actually be a really powerful application of AI in the kind of healthcare wearables sector, where you can start to say, we're noticing a pattern in your heartbeats. Maybe your resting heart rate's going up for no increased activity. What does that mean? And so there's a traditional approach to this, right? Which is where I think Apple is right now. I'm not sure that they're necessarily using kind of a big data approach to it, although I'm not sure. But there's a bit of a traditional approach where it's like, okay, we know what kind of factors are typically clues that you're having a heart attack, right? Or we can detect when you have, it's like tachycardia or something, something like that. I'm not a bio, no. But you can kind of detect these things in a traditional approach. But the question is, what more can you now detect with a big data approach? And so if you get this kind of Fitbit data set or this Apple Watch data set, and you start to have people self-reporting problems or illnesses or whatever, then maybe you could start giving early diagnoses or hints toward diagnoses. So you can say, hey, maybe you should go to a doctor. And that could end up having a really positive impact on people's lives.
That even leads me to think to current times, of course, right now for all our listeners, we're recording this during the pandemic. I know that in a couple Asian countries, they had the app where you can self-report your symptoms, or if you were sick, you could do some really easy contact tracing, and it was enforced and required by law. But if they had been able to take that app and collect your data from your Apple Watch, for example, let's say your Apple Watch could take your temperature and see how your breathing was, that would be really powerful, especially right now during a pandemic, to be able to see who has the symptoms of COVID and who is just not distancing and enforce that. I think that would be a really interesting application.
There's also to me though, and I'm not typically a very privacy kind of averse person. I tend to not really care that much about companies gathering my my more anonymous data, like my heart rate stuff, I don't really care about that. But you really do run into an issue of kind of like there has to be really strong legislation, and there isn't right now. Because in my opinion, like most people in politics are not tech savvy. And you can see this in the antitrust hearings happening right now, or rather happening in the last couple of weeks, where even the most kind of basic questions about the information economy just aren't being asked by most members of most governments right now, right? Mm-hmm. And so the inherent value of information is just not understood, and so you can't regulate it. And so what this means is that companies like Apple or companies like Fitbit, et cetera, who have a ton of really sensitive information are not being regulated to the extent that they should be. And so this is scary for a number of people. So heart rate data, relatively benign, but as soon as you start associating that with, because, you can imagine a world, right, where insurance companies get access to this data. And then suddenly they can say, okay, well, John, we were looking at your heart rate data, and it seems that you have an underlying factor, which has not been diagnosed yet, but we're going to charge you $1,000 more a year to cover you. And suddenly it's like, well, I didn't sign up for that. I didn't consent to that. How are you allowed to do this? Or they can say, we're not going to insure you. Yeah. And so, there's a number of issues which get presented with gathering a lot of information like that on everyone and mandating it. And I don't think the government's ready to regulate that just yet.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
So, regulation and healthcare, they go hand in hand whenever you're talking about, because we think about that in a real sense of doctor-patient confidentiality at the basic level, where we think, oh, I want my health data very private because of all of those things. And I agree with you. I think wearable technology also, hasn't been fully explored. Like, you worked at Shopify as an intern for a little while. I know a lot of people that would really benefit, and a lot of companies would benefit from a wearable technology where you could tell where your customers visit, right? Like a location data, because it's a wearable form of, because it's a wearable and it's on you and Bluetooth is on, there's feasibly a way with near field communication that you can pick up on Bluetooth signals. It's arguably and very much so not ethical to just pick up people's Bluetooth signals without their consent. But I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that for a retail application. Obviously, with the coronavirus currently, retail is at a grinding halt in most places. But are there any kind of future implications of wearables in our daily lives outside of healthcare for you, like as from a commercial sense?
Well, to answer your first thing about NFC and whatnot, there's actually a simpler implementation that a lot of companies are doing right now, where they just use their security cameras, and you can just kind of heat map within your store. So grocery stores are notorious for doing this, and creating a route which is actually relatively inefficient for the consumer, but gets you walking by the goods which are going to tempt you, and the kind of the profitable goods. So there's plenty of people doing that. I actually know some people who are running companies to do that. And in terms of wearables in daily life, I don't know. I think there's a definite entertainment aspect which has not been fully explored and is in the process of being explored within, if you want to qualify VR and AR as wearables, and then for sure. But I'm not sure that, a few things. One, I'm not sure that it's desirable to that many people. And two, I'm not sure that it's a good thing. I personally got rid of my smartwatch because I don't like my watch buzzing with every notification that I get. I don't like being that connected. So I think there's going to be a limit for a lot of people to how connected they want to be. And companies are going to keep trying to push that limit because it's in companies' best interest to increase their profit margins. And when it's a wearable company, they want to get as much of that as they can and get as many users as they can. So you might start to see like really addictive types of behaviors being encouraged by wearables, right? And this is actually arguably what Apple Watch is doing to some extent right now, where it's, buzzing on your wrist and always these bright colors, and it's always, it's aesthetically pleasing, yes, but it also just makes you spend that much more time being on your phone than maybe you need to be. And that increases Apple's profits because suddenly you're really reliant on their ecosystem for your social connectivity. So when the next generation comes out and they've slowed down your current Apple Watch, you're going to buy another one. So I'm not sure it's a good thing in entertainment. I really like to focus more on the kind of I like the medical uses. I think there's definitely some productivity increases which wearables can bring about as well in certain application, certain jobs. So you can definitely imagine a world in construction where wearables are really powerful, rather than carrying around, a bunch of physical tools. The most basic example being a level, right? You can have your phone be a level now, or a laser level, a laser sight. You can imagine a world where you have one little kind of like omni-tool device that's very powerful that could replace a lot of these, and that you can kind of keep strapped to your side or keep on your belt or on your wrist or even, any of these things. So I'm sure there are kind of these narrow verticals, but entertainment's one that scares me a little bit.
Yeah, advertising can be rather frightening when you think about it from a wearable aspect. If I walk past a business and then get an ad all of a sudden to my watch, do I want that? No. Will that happen in advertising at some point? I don't know.
It's already happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
If the free Wi-Fi networks are big for that, people use that. So, if you connect to a free Wi-Fi network in, a Safeway or whatever, not saying Safeway in particular does this, but there are companies that I know of which do this, where if you connect to their free Wi-Fi network, they will then serve you ads and give you flyers later on down the road, and you won't connect the two behaviors, but it will be effective in drawing you back in.
Yeah.
And that even leads me to going not necessarily past ethics, but just on a personal standpoint. Like when you get personalized pop-up ads, sometimes you think, oh yeah, that's nice. I like this product. I looked at it on Amazon earlier. Glad they're recommending it. But sometimes it's so insanely personalized that you don't even think that a company would know that about you to show you that ad. So it's almost the question of when are these systems so tuned in? Like when is it too creepy and too much for businesses to be doing?
Well, and that's a question that they're trying to answer too, right?
Yeah.
I think it was Walmart, but I'm not sure. But there was a big kind of brick and mortar company that even kind of pre-internet era, really, they could figure out when you were pregnant very early on.
No, it's always about this.
Target,
was it Target? Target? Okay, sorry,
Target,
Walmart. Yeah. Although I'm sure Walmart's done the same. But it's not like these companies who have billions and billions of dollars, sometimes, they're worth trillions of dollars. It's not like they don't have the resources to figure out these things about people. If you dedicate enough research and money to it, you can figure out some really creepy things about people from relatively benign information. So for them, a lot of it, because it's not being highly regulated, a lot of it is simply how creepy is too creepy that it doesn't increase their bottom line.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe serving people ads about being pregnant before they know they're pregnant is creepy and it won't increase their bottom line. But maybe if we get them a week after they are likely to have taken a test, maybe that increases our bottom line because they're more likely to buy products from us than our competitor who will recommend in 2 weeks. Right? Like it's this weird, like,
yeah, it's finding that middle ground.
Yeah, they have this creepy amount of information. Most people would consider it creepy. Some people would not, right? It's not inherently necessarily creepy to say, okay, based on my buying habits, that I'm probably pregnant, right? It's not that creepy inherently to some people, but a lot of people, maybe a majority of the buying population, would find it creepy, and so it wouldn't increase the bottom line. But yeah, it's a weird part of capitalism now that they're trying to answer these, like, we know this about you, but maybe we can't use that to sell to you directly because, you're going to be weirded out by it. Yeah. I'm not sure that's ever necessarily happened before this information era.
Well, the new world, and I think it will only become more intense, and that middle ground will be more and more debated in future with our generation and younger generations.
Yeah, and the hope, I think, is that our generation and more tech savvy perhaps generations go into politics and start to influence some policy on this, and also the research and the academic kind of debates on what is ethical here are still very young as well. And over the next few decades, my hope, I don't want to sound like a cynic on all of this, although I am, definitely right now a little cynical about some things with privacy and big companies. But I think that that over the next few decades, we'll see this kind of catch up. Right now, companies are far ahead of universities and politics and kind of the general public. But I think we're going to see a catch up over the coming years and decades, where policy catches up, where academic, ethical, philosophical debates catch up, and I think that'll be a really good world to be in.
Yeah, I don't know that your views are necessarily cynical. I wouldn't say that. I think that a lot of people in our age group in general, in their 20s and 30s, and even in their early teens, are under the same kind of feeling, and just like we've seen historically with companies with antitrust laws, years and years ago before our times, it's just a series of catching up, right? We know our governments will lag behind in time, and they'll catch up over time. What does that mean for us, and how will that play out? Who knows? Who knows who will be the next maverick that takes that on in politics? Maybe you. Who knows? But it's definitely someone with a passion that will come in, and this will be, I think, more heavily regulated. Do people really need to know? Do companies really need to know what my current life status is? Probably not for a lot of things. How tailored are ads and those kinds of things are interesting topics to explore and think about as time goes on, for sure. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a cynical view. I think a lot of people share that view.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep, great. All right, well, thank you so much, John, for being here today. That was a really great conversation. I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to talk with you guys about this.
Yeah, of course. So for all the listeners, you can find more of John's content in the show notes below. His Instagram is at @thejohnfish. Your YouTube will be linked below. Some really great videos on there. Again, my personal favorite is the Shakespeare AI one. I'll link that below. Do you have a personal favorite that I should link?
No, that one's my favorite too. All of them are my favorite, except for the ones that aren't.
Good way to look at it.
And thanks, as always, for listening to the NextGen podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the NextGen podcast so that you never miss an episode. You can find more of the NextGen podcast and content all at the Commercient social handles, which are pretty easy to remember. That's @Commercient on everything. And last but not least, if you've listened all the way to the end of this podcast and you're interested in Commercient Sync, please make sure you tell your salesperson that you're dealing with that you want to use promo code podcast2. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have a great day.